This video is brought to you by CoolStuffInc.com, where you can find cool stuff in stock.
Hello and welcome back to another day in the arena. It's me, it's CGB. It has been quite a day in the arena with a lot of things coming between me and my aspirations to have a new deck every day on YouTube for you. And today, of course, still sick, day 3 of illness. Disclaimer, I'm sick. Hopefully that wears off. Part 2, microphone wouldn't work. I actually recorded a ton of content, like an hour's worth of content, and then went back and no audio. What? So I set out to do what I normally do, which is when I make that mistake, it happens more than you think when I forget to use have the microphone active. When I make that mistake, I usually suck it up, hit record, do it again. And this time I sat down, sucked it up, hit record to do it again, and the power in the house went out just like immediately. When I hit the record button, I broke my house. I broke electricity. Unbelievable. And now I'm just nervous that I'm even going to get a video done in time, so I'm going to do something I rarely do. I'm going to talk over already recorded video. I think I can set it up so it looks like my webcam talks over it. The game sounds were captured, so the game sounds will line up. It's just going to be me talking about what happened in this game, because there were some good games, and honestly, while normally I would re-record it, I'm so sick and I'm so kind of stressed that not today. So sorry to make this about me. Happy New Year! Happy New Year to you. Let's talk about you, viewer. Don't forget to like and subscribe. There, we talked about the viewer. How you doing? Anyway, this deck, Friendly Fires. I made a Cavalier Oketra Fires version not that long ago, and I said in that video I might talk about the differences between different Fires of Invention decks at some point. And that's what we're doing here today. This is a Planeswalker version of Fires of Invention that I would run. A lot of people blur the lines between the three types of Fires decks. There are Fires decks built around Cavalier of Flame, that guy. There are Fires decks built around Sarkhan the Masterless, this dude. And there are decks built around Fae of Wishes, which have extra powerful stuff in the sideboard. Of the 3 decks, the most aggro is Cavalier of Flame version. The most sort of middling, mid-rangey is this one, Friendly Fire. And the most controlling is Fae of Wishes. Each one has their good matchups. For me, the thing that puts the Cavalier version as the best version is its assertive game plan. It is faster and much more aggressive because of the way that you can gain haste for all your creatures with Cavalier Flame and Kenrith than this version can be. So it runs over this version if they have a good draw. So in the matchup between the Fires decks, I think the Cavalier deck wins all of them because of haste. But otherwise, when it comes to the rest of the meta, all these decks are competitive and can be very fun and are good at different points. For example, against a control deck, I think this is the better deck to be running compared to the other Fires of Invention deck, because this version has Narset, which can be grindy. It has Drawn from Dreams, which can be grindy. It has Sarkhan and all these Planeswalkers, which have to be answered. It has 2 uncounterable Chandra the Awakened Infernos. And down here, hiding in the mana base, 4 Mobilized Districts, uncounterable sources of pressure that can force the opponent to act. Speaking of the mana base, no basic lands. Why? As the great Dave Chappelle once said, because fuck 'em, that's why. I cracked myself up. Sorry, that was probably really bad. Really cringy. Anyway, here we go. We've got the Planar Beacons and the Mobilized Districts. These are 2 of the big draws to the deck. Against aggressive strategies, we have a persistent source of life gain with the Planeswalkers in the deck. And against other strategies, we have Mobilized District. And once you have 2 or 3 Planeswalkers on the field, and you have Fires of Invention, so you don't use your lands for other things, activating Mobilized District every turn becomes easy. And it makes it feel as if you have a Nissa who shakes the world on the battlefield, throwing your own 3/3 lands at the opponent. So Mobilized District is a big draw. I liked it so much I cut the basic lands just to have the districts. And so far it's worked out pretty well for me. So other cards in the deck, you want some amount of Drawn for Dreams, but you don't want to go overboard because you already have Narset. You want a Time Wipe because you don't close the game as fast as a Cavalier deck and you don't have big creatures to trade, so you need an out if the opponent builds a big board. Deafening Clarion we've seen before. Brazen Borrower and Bonecrusher Giant. These could be Scorching Dragonfire and Justice Strike, something like that. Removal spells that Narset can find, and I would understand that completely. The more I played the deck, the more I just really wanted these. I wanted the option to have an assertive plan, to be able to say, okay, you're going to play Simic Flash against me and just sit there on counter spells, planning to counter Teferi and Fires of Invention and Sarkhan, and then I can't win. Well, what if I play a Bonecrusher Giant? Are you just going to sit there while it attacks you? What if I play a Brazen Borrower? So against those controlling strategies that have counters that really mess you up, having assertive plays to keep them busy while you set up your Chandra is just a really good place to be. Okay, I'm talking too much. It's the third time I've recorded this intro. Don't overthink it or anything. Now let's dive in and let the nonsense begin. And Happy New Year. Okay, if I've done this right, my camera should be perfectly layered over my camera from the original recording, so you should see me and hear me while this game plays. I wonder if I could do this in such a way that you'd never know. Is breaking the fourth wall bad? Rasfo. Sup, Rasfo? How you doing? So, that hand immediately screams keep to me. You can see it was like a snap keep, didn't even have to think about it. Fires of Invention, Deafening Clarion, a Scryland, 2 Interplanar Beacons. You're thinking, okay, as long as I draw a spell somewhere in here, it's looking good. You still want something to fill the gap between 3, 4, 5, and 6, and immediately I see a Bonecrusher Giant, which, yeah, that'll fill it. So let's keep the Bonecrusher Giant. Blood Crypt, Shock, Knight of the Ebon Legion. So right away, rewarded for keeping the Bonecrusher Giant. The opponent has a... The Knight's deck is pretty strong. I'm thinking about if I want to Shock for a Steam Vents just to make sure I curve out perfectly, but there's no real reason to when I could play an Interplanar Beacon for no cost. And then I'm thinking, well, is there any chance I have a pump spell and I want a Bonecrusher on my main phase? So I decide not to Bonecrusher on the main phase, pass it back, and now it's time for Knight of the Ebon Legion to get busy. So Stomp, Knight of the Ebon Legion goes down. The opponent's still with 2 mana, but something holding priority, and it becomes pretty clear that they're going to play a Black Lance Paragon. So now we can play a Beacon and play a Bonecrusher Giant, which can definitely trade with the Paragon if the opponent attacks with it, if that's even what we want to do. But being able to sequence Bonecrusher Giant Stomp on a creature into the Bonecrusher Giant on the play against an aggressive deck is so strong. So from this position, we have a good blocker. The opponent has a 3/1 attacker, and there's an Angrat's Rampage, which gets around the trigger from the Bonecrusher Giant, which deals 2 damage, which is a pretty good play. Black Lance Paragon swings in for damage, and now we sit on an option. We have 2 Shock lands. We could Shock to play Fires now and play another spell. Or we could say we're not doing that much with the mana anyway. I could save the 2 points of life, play the land tapped, and use the Bonecrusher Giant on the Black Lance Paragon, because I don't have a 5-drop right now. If I had a 5-drop, like a few more cards to play with my Fires, I think that I would definitely run Fires out there. But here, since the whole plan is going to be Shock this Black Lance Paragon, Stomp this Black Lance Paragon, then play Fires and play the Bonecrusher Giant anyway, I may as well do it without paying the 2 life. So the opponent plays Rotting Regisaur, which changes the mood in the room. It's too big for me to deal with any of the cards I have currently. And looking at the Chandra in my hand, now the plan becomes, okay, can we get to turn 6, play the Chandra, and use it to get rid of the Regisaur before the opponent plays a land and puts Embercleave on the Regisaur. If the Regisaur has 7 toughness, Chandra can't kill it. But the opponent only has 2 cards in their hand, meaning they're going to have to discard 1 to their Regisaur, meaning they would have to have their last card be Embercleave, and they have to top deck the untapped land for it to work out. So here's Fires, here's a Bonecrusher Giant to stand between the opponent's Regisaur and my face. The opponent drops off a Bonecrusher Giant, which means their last card must be pretty good, or they could have instant speed cast that Bonecrusher Giant. When Regisaur comes crashing in, we take the block just to save that life total and keep it nice and high. The opponent plays out the land, which they must have drawn, otherwise they would have cast Stomp on their upkeep. And then they play Drill Bit, which was the last card from their hand. And now we have no Chandra. totally brutal. Chandra is gone with just a Deafening Clarion and land off the top, 17 life, and a Rotting Regisaur coming after my face. So down to 10 we fall, and what did the opponent top deck? It's a second Rotting Regisaur. So with the pressure on, our old friend Brazen Borrower makes an appearance. On the bright side, with Brazen Borrower here, we can bounce a Regisaur, and then the opponent will have to discard it or activate their Castle Loch Lane, which is kind of hiding behind my face here, to draw a card during their upkeep, which puts them off tempo for the Regisaur anyway. So the opponent, I should keep my mouse out of this, shouldn't I? Yes, I should. I should never touch my mouse. Sorry, habits. Habits, I can't help it. I try to mouse over the things I'm talking about. I'm breaking the fourth wall, but the opponent chooses to discard their Rotting Regisaur. And now Angrass Rampage takes out the Borrower, and the opponent drops me to 3. The Borrower couldn't block anyway. Narset makes an appearance off the top to try to save us from this mess. 2 life from the Interplanar Beacons. And we dig up what? I was hoping for a Teferi. We find a Time Wipe, which that does cure the Regisaur problem. A 1 of in the deck, by the way. And 3 lands go to the bottom. The opponent top decks land and uses the castle to draw on their turn, but they run it right into a Narset. And you can see the smile on my face because I actually called it. I was like, that they're not gonna remember this Narset. And it got him. And then Sarkhan is the next find off the Narset, and you can see the tables turning quickly. Sarkhan will make a dragon to get something on the board and immobilize District, setting us up for a Deafening Clarion that can gain a ton of life next turn and attack for a ton of damage. The opponent pulls Stormfist Crusader off the top. Things are a little bit too late though, as Sarkhan, Narset, Deafening Clarion, and another Sarkhan all threaten to take over the game. Plus the Sarkhan, the opponent knows about the Clarion, so they know the lifelink is coming. Remember, it was a revealed card from the earlier drill bit. And with 3 damage before we activate the Mobilized District, and then a post-activation, we're attacking for 15, we're gaining 12 life, and the opponent says, I can't beat that with 1 card off the top. They pack it in. Next up, I receive a direct challenge from a friend of mine, Maik. They're on my friends list. For those of you who might wonder, I don't have a specific time that I record or have friend challenges. If you happen to challenge me while I'm recording a video and your timing is really good like this was, I was between games, I may accept it and you might make it in the video. If you're looking for my challenge ID, all my Twitch subscribers, YouTube members, and patrons have access to it in my Discord channel. So make sure you join the Discord. So we keep the hand being very optimistic with a Temple of Triumph. 2 Temples of Triumph. The idea is if we hit 2 lands, we already have fires and we're good against aggressive decks. And we have Sarkhan. All we have to do is hit land, but our first 2 scries go directly to the bottom. And it's already not looking good for your hero. Here's the Temple, scry, keep on top. And another Temple of Triumph comes off the top to just keep the train rolling, and we see a Sacred Foundry. Fires of Invention will fix your mana, and when I'm looking at Crixus, as long as Fires resolves, I shouldn't have to worry about blue mana anymore. We can play Boros Fires of Invention. And on turn 3, it's Tomebound Lich for the opponent, which puts us in a pickle. The Lich and its ability to loot, draw, and discard every turn does mean that it's a pretty awkward card to deal with. We could put a Bonecrusher Giant on the battlefield and try to block it, but if the opponent removes it, that's not great for us, and the opponent gets to loot. So the Lich and the discarding of a quasi-duplicate certainly implies that they're a reanimator strategy. So we want them to see as few cards as possible. So I decided to go for the surefire plan of Deafening Clarion away the Tomebound Lich and just keep it off the battlefield. If I Teferi the Lich, they get to draw and loot an additional card. So the fact that they didn't discard an Agent of Treachery or a Drakuseth already means that they don't have one yet. So we want to kill the Lich as quickly as possible and keep them away from it. And then the opponent slams Fires of Invention. And oh man, it's a Fires Reanimator deck. The Lich draws, And with some consideration, again, the longer they think, the less likely they are to have a Drakuseth or agent of any kind, and they drop off a land. So they're still missing the key piece of the combo. I don't think they would keep a hand without a reanimator spell or a combo piece, so we can guess they have a reanimation spell. But they don't have the Agent of Treachery. And so that's why I decide I'm going to bounce a Lich here and keep all the pressure away from me and let the opponent have their Fires of Invention. I do debate it for a while, but letting the opponent hit me with the Lich is probably too much. We drop a Sarkhan, we make a 4/4. And now we try to dial up the pressure and close before the opponent can reanimate a Drakuseth or use an Agent of Treachery to steal something. So it's time to be aggressive. Time to be very aggressive. Tomebound Lich. Draw a discard, and we see a Merchant. A Haggler. So there's Merchant of the Veil. It's a 2/3. You can spend 3 mana to discard a card and draw a card. And the Haggle section lets you discard a card and draw a card. And then off the top comes the ultimate in pressure from a Fires deck. Kenrith, the Returned King. And as we add it up here with a whole bunch of damage, we see that we can deal, I think it was 23. 4 from the Dragon, 4 from Sarkhan, 4 from Teferi, 4 from Bonecrusher. That's 16, add 5, that's 21 damage. Now the opponent can gain 1 from their Death Touch Tomebound Lich, and they're not dead, but it does force them to block everything. So we activate our Sarkhan, plus the Teferi before I forget how that works. Play the Bonecrusher for 0, play the Kenrith for 0, give everything haste and trample, and by the way, we still have mana open to gain 5 life, just cuz. This will force the opponent to block and let some of their board go, which means they don't get to Lich loot by attacking next turn, most likely. And of course, it leaves the opponent at a precariously low life total. I believe their best blocks are Veil on Bonecrusher and Lich on Kenrith, so that leaves them at 4, which means there's a lot of ways to take 4. Sarkhan and any Planeswalker or the Dragon token will do. The opponent's Haggle drops another land off, and we see they're still just shy of, they can't find that giant creature for their Reanimator deck. I know I comment several times in the gameplay, I'm like, it's very sad to do that to a friend. They're trying to do something sweet, and now I have to crush them mercilessly with my Planeswalker Fires of Invention build. So, if you want to put Fs in the chat for our friend Make, by all means, you can put Fs in the chat. F's in the chat for Crixus Reanimator. F's in the chat for Make. F's in the chat because CGB killed his friend. Rixamati Reveler discards yet another land, and it tells you exactly what you need to know about this game. The opponent just couldn't draw a reanimation target. They play Bond of Revival here, so they had the Reanimator. And the Tomebound Lich discards Agent of Treachery, which you know came off the top. Heartbreaking. The opponent sends in the Lich because it has haste thanks to the Agent of Treachery. The Lich does take a damage from Sarkhan, but there's only one dragon. And then, speaking of dragons, they discard another Drakuseth. That was the last 2 cards of their library. So, as bad as it feels, we bring forth the doom that the opponent surely knew was coming. In the form of flying dragon planeswalkers. Live by the dragon, die by the dragon. Marika, or Marika, however you want to take it. We're on the draw. We're looking at a hand with plenty of land, no Fires of Invention, early interaction, and a Kenrith to play like an awkward mid-range game. The opponent opens on a basic plains. Could mean anything. It's probably not white aggro since they play like 16 1-drops. Probably not Selesnya aggro. They play like 20 1-drops. But when you see white mana, well, some scry decisions are easy, friends. Sometimes you reveal a Fires of Invention. When you see white mana, you tend to think that your removal spells will be good. Unfortunately for us, the opponent then immediately plays blue mana, and it occurs to me, oh boy, blue-white control. So right away we're thinking, do we want to Bonecrusher their face? Do we want to be that aggressive and try to get them reactive? And do we want to shock or use this opportunity to do a Scryland? You have to think about your future turns. When am I going to use the tapped Scryland if I don't use it this turn? And I think I decided I would try it on turn 5 because it's unlikely I would run a Kenrith into a counterspell. So we play the Bacon. We're already decided. We're going to Bonecrush face and then cast Bonecrusher Giant and try to get some tempo. The opponent plays the mana. They have the mana open for Absorb. So Bonecrusher the face, shock, play Bonecrusher Giant, see if the opponent wants to respond with a counterspell, what they're going to use. And it is Quench. So right away that tells us our opponent plays Quench, which is a good thing to know going forward, because where there's one, there's sometimes two. The opponent also kept their top card with Opt, which normally implies against blue-white another counterspell. So now we have a decision. We could run the Fires of Invention into Quench, or we could try to resolve a Narset. The thing about running out Fires of Invention, it's not like Fires of Invention resolves in this matchup and then we're way ahead. The opponent can remove it with Planar Cleansing. The opponent can do a lot of things to it. If the Fires resolves, we have a good turn where we get to play both Fires and Narset. If it doesn't resolve, then we free up our Narset to play around Quench the following turn if we need to. And there is the Sinister Sabotage keeping on top, which implies to me yet another counter spell, which is scary. And then we draw Brazen Borrower. So we could run Narset, we could shock, play Narset around Quench, or we could say go to our opponent and hold up the Brazen Borrower option. And perhaps playing a Brazen Borrower on their turn will get them to be reactive. Now we can also shock here and have the ability to play the blue 1 for Brazen Borrower around Quench. The opponent goes for God Eternal Kefnet, which I immediately notice is a great petty theft target. And it's too bad I don't have 3 blues so that I could theft and cast the Borrower and tap the opponent out if they wanted to quench it. But petty theft resolves, and the opponent now with 1 blue and 1 white open really looks like a Dovin's Veto. But we also know that the opponent plays Quench. So we could run Kenrith into Quench or wait a turn and play around Dovin's Veto. We could also play Narset around a Quench, not take any shock damage. And we can also hold up a Brazen Borrower for end step. So it's a really weird turn. At the end of the day, Narset looks more appealing because now we know the opponent has God Eternal Kefnet. They're going to want to resolve it and get it going. So getting Narset down now where it can get both activations as opposed to when there's a Kefnet on the battlefield that can attack it after 1 activation. And the opponent lets it resolve, which tells me that they do have Quench, not Dovin's Veto. With the Fires of Invention on top, we decide to keep it. The opponent treats this as a must counter, even if it isn't the end-all be-all of the matchup. But with Kenrith ready, and with the ability here to play Fires of Invention and back it up with another Narset if we choose to, we're feeling in a pretty good spot. The opponent has 1 blue and 2 white open, so it's not Absorb, and we don't think it's a Dovin's Veto. And then we minus this Narset, and we see an interesting choice. Chandra can't be countered. It can also get rid of the Kefnet. Teferi Time Raveler, if it resolves, takes out counters for the rest of the game. And when you look at our mana, we have 7 mana available. If we take the Teferi and then play a Fires of Invention, the opponent, if they counter the Fires, the Teferi resolves. If they don't counter the Fires, we have an advantage in playing more spells for the rest of the game. And if they don't have a counter at all, they know we're going to go Fires into Teferi, which means they're in a terrible spot. And they concede, probably out of the sheer frustration and a little bit of boredom, because yes, I had to think about those plays quite a bit. Next game against Bedezzapo 91. And right away, what a hand. So, we don't have Fires of Invention, but we have a pretty good curve. We have a Scry, we have a life gain land in the Beacon, we have a Bonecrusher Giant, and we have a Time Wipe and a Narset. The Time Wipe might be a dead card against some kind of a control strategy, and our opponent does have a Teferi avatar. So I'm a little worried about whether or not the Time Wipe is good. But here's a Temple of Triumph, and we immediately see a Narset. So with a Bonecrusher Giant to keep Narset from being pressured, and with multiple Narsets, I figure, hey, if Fires of Invention is the plan, Narset finds Fires, so we keep a Narset. Steam Vents. So when you see a tapped Steam Vents, you immediately wonder, like, well, is my Bonecrusher Giant actually going to tag anything? And I think after a little bit of debate, we decide having Bonecrusher available is better than not having Bonecrusher available, though we're not quite sure what the Steam Vents is up to. And then when the opponent plays an island in a Shimmer of Possibility, this is either some janky 1000-Year Storm deck memeing in Diamond, or it's another Fires of Invention deck. So, against another Fires deck, I have a big debate. Do I Bonecrusher their face, or do I wait and try to see a target? If I Bonecrusher the face, it's a big tempo play, and the Fires mirror is all about tempo. So I actually have to debate this quite a bit, because the Shimmer, there could still be other stuff going on that I'm not expecting. And how important would it be to shoot a Teferi on 1, for example? But eventually, the idea is, it's a mirror, we're on the play, let's use tempo to our advantage, let's Bonecrusher the face. We draw Fires of Invention, but that doesn't change the Narset play. I still think that what I really want here is a Narset on the field, as a Bonecrusher Giant plays right into something like a Deafening Clarion. And we find Sarkhan right away, so immediately, life feels good. We're in the Fires mirror, we're on the play, we have a Narset, and we have a Sarkhan. And that probably, the amount of known information in this matchup probably decides a lot about what happens next, because looking at our hand, we have the Fires of Invention, we can shock, play it now. The only thing really missing is a land. We need to draw a land so that Sarkhan can come down next turn and take over the game, but we're way ahead. And when we minus the Narset and see 2 more Fires and reveal one of the Fires that we put into our hand to our opponent, they probably in a jealous, nerdy rage, table flipping rage, exit the building. Boo-doo-doo. Boo-doo-doo-doo-ba-doo. Doo-ba-doo-ba-doo-ba-doo-ba-doo. Anyway, on the play, 3 lands, one of them scries. Narset to help us find Fires, Teferi to bounce things. And it is Sarkhan the Masterless to the bottom here, because land and Fires are the only acceptable cards to keep right now, in my opinion. I think that anything else would be bottomed in this spot where you just need to hit your land drops and cut the opponent off. So we see blue and green, and right away, oh boy. Oh boy. So, the debate is, do we run out Teferi into a Quench? Do we say go and Bonecrusher Giant? Do we run out Narset? And the idea here is I have Chandra, so I need to stall. I need time to be taken away. And although Teferi probably has the highest upside, I don't think a Flash opponent would keep a hand without an early counterspell, so I go for the Narset as kind of the bait. The idea is to use Teferi on some critical turn to mess the opponent up, and I hit Fires right away with the Narset, and that resolved, and the opponent did nothing. And my face is very... Sorry, I covered my face. But, yeah, like, what does it mean when the opponent does nothing in that spot? Now, the sequencing did still pass, and they didn't play a Growth Spiral. So what do they have? And Brazen Borrower comes to mind. So we go for Fires of Invention. I'm like, well, I'm just going to slam it then. It's the highest upside play, and the opponent knows that I have it. And we see a Growth Spiral, which they must have just drawn because they didn't play it last turn, into a Fabled Passage, into a Quench. So I really wonder, in hindsight, like, and in the moment I talked about it too, did the opponent misclick? Because they either had the Quench or the Growth Spiral in their hand when I played the Narset. So maybe their thought process was, I'm not going to counter Narset. I'll eventually attack Narset if I care. It also means they probably don't have Hydroid Crixus in their deck, or at the very least in their hand, because they're not worried about Narset at all. They're like, go ahead and draw 2 cards. And it does mean they could still have many more counterspells. But the fact that they passed that turn without playing the Growth Spiral or the Quench is very unusual. So now looking at all this open mana, we have a ton of interesting choices. The Bonecrusher Giants can apply pressure, and we can draw counterspells, but I decide what I want to do is kill a Nightpack Ambusher. If the opponent goes for an Ambusher here, double Bonecrusher Giant gets rid of it. And that is definitely one of the ways the opponent can run away with the game, and most players on ladders slam their ambushers. Here instead we see a Brazen Borrower. So I'm debating, do I do this now? Do I Bonecrush on my turn? And I decide I actually wouldn't mind if the opponent countered a Bonecrusher Giant because I have a backup. I also want the information. Does the opponent attack the Narset or not? And when they attack my face, I know they don't care about Narset, which means they probably don't run Nissa, which means they probably don't run Hydroid Crixus. All right, so regardless, it's time to kill the Brazen Borrower, and hopefully the opponent will counter this, especially since I have a backup. But if I were in their shoes, I would probably never counter a Bonecrusher Giant from this position. So I decide to hold on to the Bonecrusher Giant and wait for a future target. I do think my opponent might have another Brazen Borrower, and with a land off the top, all the options are now open. We have Bonecrusher Giant, followed by Teferi as an option. We have Chandra the Awakened Inferno as an option. I'm still thinking about Nightpack Ambusher. If I play my Chandra and plus my Chandra, and the opponent plays Ambusher on end step, they can attack the Chandra, and then I have to -4 the Chandra to kill the Ambusher potentially. But I decided it's still just the highest upside play. If they have anything other than Ambusher, Chandra is so hard to deal with. It puts them on a clock. It has a bajillion loyalty, and they can't counter it. So we drop a Chandra, we plus it, we give our opponent the emblem, and we hold our breath. Do they have the wolf? Do you have it? And what flashes in on end step is not the wolf at all. It is Frilled Mystic. The Wizard Lizard can't put enough pressure on Chandra to save its life. And when the opponent attacks my face, oh my gosh. Well, we know they're in a bad place now. The Chandra's not going anywhere. Paradise Druid is the play, which tells me they probably do have Nissa and Crixus. And just maybe they weren't thinking about that with when they let that Narset resolve. If they have a Crixus in their hand right now, that's got to be pretty tilting. And while I debate how to next torture my opponent by trying to resolve my Teferi, having my Mobilized District, ticking up my Chandra, and getting out a Bonecrusher Giant, they scoop it up. Welcome to Diamond Tier 3, friends. All right, that's the set of videos that I recorded without audio. Now I've filled it in for you. Thank you for putting up with me. I hope you enjoyed today's video, and I know it wasn't the norm, but yeah, sick, and the whole universe conspiring against me. So if you have ever been sick and hoped that people out there would give you a break for one day, smash like, hit that subscribe button. And thank you for watching this video, and I will see you later.